Okay, I think we're recording. Hey, LinkedIn fam, this is Monique Braham-Evans. As I had announced earlier, I am starting a new series called Don't Stay Silent. I encourage everyone to stand in their truth and speak it. And that's exactly what I have asked friends of mine to do today. The very first guest is a great friend who I have relied on in good times and bad, especially since she works in HR. Her name is Jerneeka Sams. Jerneeka, say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody. I would just say, I am honored that you asked me to do this. As you being your first guest and all, it is quite an honor. So
Absolutely. Jerneeka, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
yes. So I, as Monique mentioned, a HR professional. I've been mostly in talent acquisition for over 15 years now. But right now, I just recently transitioned to a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager at my company. I've been there now for over a year. I've been in this role for 4 months. It's official, kind of transitioned as we were on a hiring freeze for a bit. And now I can stay in my role and kind of see these things forward. So it's a new challenge for me that I'm looking forward to seeing and growing in.
Yes. Awesome. I am ready to get into it, girl. And I am doing the old school style with index cards.
Yes,
Let's go.
cards, bring it.
Companies often tend to point to their multicultural entry-level talent pipeline as being evidence of supporting diversity and inclusion. In your professional opinion, is this enough?
Yeah, and I just want to make the caveat that all my opinions are my own. It is not a reflection of my company, my mama, my family, my friends. It's all me. But, in my professional as well as my personal opinion, I think it's great that you start with, the entry-level pipeline because it is easier. However, that's not where you need to stay, right? Because bringing in early talent is great and you can have this diverse pool however you want to look at it, right? Be it, BIPOC, gender, whatever the case may be. But then what are you doing to retain that talent? What are you doing to move them and promote them up, right? Like, because there is a certain level at which people stop and, can't get to that next level. Like we're still having, first Black this, first Latin X that. So there needs to be more. Again, it's certainly one way to tackle it, and there certainly needs to be opportunities for people, who are graduating or coming out of college to see what these opportunities can be, but they also need to see that there is momentum for them when they get beyond, that entry level. What does a manager look like? What does a director look like? What does a VP look like? Is there somebody who looks like me in those roles? What are you doing to support those people and making sure they're set up for success? So, it's one step. It's always certainly very helpful to have those entry-level people there, but you need to make sure that there is a groundwork for them to continue to grow in that career if you want them to stay in your company.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great segue to the next question. There is a Darth of Black senior leadership, which has been examined in this Black Lives Matter movement and undertaking. How can we address this pervasive scarcity and solve for it?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It's certainly not. There are many, many ways in which people can go about solving it. I think it's finding that talent and reaching out, because people are always kind of like, oh, I don't know where these people are. It's like all the Black people I know, like we all know each other. We all know somebody who knows somebody who is like, oh, she does that, right? So it's like, who is in your network? Who are you reaching out to? Are you making them comfortable in these spaces, right? Like you can't keep digging at the same water hole looking for talent and then say we can't find somebody. If you're only looking at, the Ivy League schools, not that there aren't Black and people of color there, but again, that's only a subpopulation. Are you looking at state schools? Like, how are you approaching all these things? So there's always recruiting, but there's also like widening your circle and making sure that you have the talent and the way that you're kind of bringing those people in. So changing your job descriptions, not being so like limited in scope. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I want somebody who's coming from a company who's doing exactly the same thing. Why am I leaving my company to do that, right? Like maybe I've done something else somewhere else in a different industry, but certainly have the same skill set to do so. So it's really like, how do you approach, you know, the ways in which you're looking for things? And again, that's a broad question that has a lot of answers, but those are just some of the ways in which you can to look at these things.
Mm-hmm. You kind of touched on this in your answer. So companies have said in their defense, when their racial breakdown of staffing was critiqued, that they could not find diverse talent. With your extensive recruitment background, how do you respond to these claims?
Like, where are you looking? You know, it's like, again, you know, if you're tapping into the same pools, if you're like, oh, we're looking from Yale or we're looking from this, you know, that's not going to get you where you're looking. Even if you not only go into the HBCUs, but going to the state universities, right? A lot of those have diverse populations in terms of what you're looking for. And then also, don't be so narrow-minded in terms of how you are looking at the talent, right? Like, you know, just because maybe I know one coding language versus the other, you might automatically slash me out and be like, oh, I don't have time. Everybody's going to have to ramp up, right? And I get that, you know, a lot of companies move at a fast pace and stuff like that, but let's face it, there are a lot of people that are going to need a learning curve, some longer than others, but to be truthful, you're willing to give somebody that you know, in your network and be like, well, I know they can do a good job, or I know they went to Yale, so they're smart. They can do it. Not to put Yale on the spot, but you know what I mean? Like, you just know, you'll give someone else the benefit of the doubt because they come from your circle, whereas somebody who might come from a pipeline that you're not familiar with is like, oh no. And in the minute that person, just like any other hire, may not do well, it's like, see, I knew it. And then you brush everyone with the same stroke and say that they're not talented. So it's a matter of like, are you setting these people up for success? How are you looking for it? And then are you really giving them the benefit to do well? Because sometimes, you know, people can sense things, right? Like sometimes you'd be like, am I paranoid? But it's like, if your manager, you know, when your manager is looking at you to make a mistake, and every time you make a mistake and you feel like you're being watched, of course you're going to make more. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where you're constantly on pins and needles, so you're not performing well. And then the next thing you know, so it's, again, you have to not only look at your recruitment practices and where you're looking for people, but then what are you doing to support them, you know, when they get in the door?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Switching gears for a minute, resume whitening. Yeah. What is this practice and why do people feel it to be necessary?
Yeah, so, you know, you had to tell me what that was, even though I've done it myself. You know, my name is Jerneeka, and it's very ethnic, right? You know, no one is confused when they see what, you know, Jerneeka is. They do get confused when I speak because they're like, where are you from, right? I'm from Harlem. Really, where's your family from? Because it's like they don't really expect, you know, a Jerneeka from Harlem to be articulate, right? Like that's not what they're expecting. So, you know, it's something as a way for Black people and people of color to kind of get their foot in the door. Like I've only had my initials on my resume. There have been times too when I've taken off, like if I'm in a Black Student Association, you might take that off. So, you know, many people of different cultures, if your name isn't European sounding, you know, we either change our name or we shorten it or we put something that makes it easier for people to pronounce. You know, we take off any identifiers that might, you know, if we're part of an association that's more culturally related, or, you know, even having sometimes your zip code, right? Like as a recruiter, and particularly if you're like in New York City, wherever you might live in a tri-state area, you might know certain zip codes, right? And you might be like, oh, or you see an address and you're like, oh, I don't know where that person lives. And again, you have these preconceived notions. So sometimes it's scrubbing all the identifying information off your resume just to get your foot in the door. Because again, recruiters are human, right? That's just the fact of it. And there are some biases in there. Now, again, it could get you in the door, but sometimes too, they have preconceived notions of what that looks like. So again, we're trying to do what we can to leverage to at least have the conversation to show that we have what it takes to get our foot in the door, because again, there are a lot of barriers preventing that. So, you know, people always like, you know, be who you are, just stay in it. But it's like, you know, up until this point, right, there was definitely a time before this where it was just like, no, maybe not, you know. And so we all do what we have to do. I mean, now it's a little bit more like, you know, I'm staying in my name, and you know, I'm always very conscious of somebody whose name people get wrong, even though it's spelled and sounds how it's phonetic, right? Like there's no getting wrong if you want to do different. I'm always like, tell me your name, and they're like, no, you can call me no, tell me how to pronounce your name, and I may get it wrong, but if we constantly push people, we say all kinds of European names with like 3 consonants, you know, together. If we can do that, then we can figure out how to say, you know, again, it may be more bothersome for the person. They might be like, all right, just stop. Like you're just doing too much. But again, we need to keep pushing people to say names that we're not comfortable with, because then it becomes the norm as opposed to making other people comfortable. So it's just a way people have done to kind of get their foot in corporate America. You know, it's just one of the, unfortunately, the games you got to play.
Right. Unfortunately. Code switching, is it a skill or a burden?
I definitely think it's a skill. You know, at times can it be burdensome for sure. But I look at it as a skill, because, you know, there's definitely ways in which, you know, it takes a certain level, and it's not even acting, it's more about having enough sense that you begin to know how to read people, right? And you know what's going to work. And I think that's a skill that a lot of people don't get. And I think, you know, it's one of those things where you're like, you can't take certain people certain places, right? And that just goes across the board. You know, there are certain friends and family members where you're just like, oh, I can't take you everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's a skill that you develop over time that allows you, makes you adaptable. And whether or not that necessarily, I'm not saying it's always the best defense in terms of changing the way you are, but, you know, you're not changing who you are at the core. I feel like it's more about adapting to the environment that you're in. Mm-hmm. You know, I look at it that way. Now, again, should we have to change the way we dress or speak to make others feel? No. Right. But I also feel like there's a time and a place for certain things. I'm very old school in that respect. You know, like you know, there's work, there's play, there's, you know, different things that we do. So I will say that, and that's my old school way of thinking about things. Like it's I feel like it's a skill. Now, again, you know, when everybody's like bring your authentic self to work and do all this stuff, you know, you shouldn't have to code switch if that's not something you want to do. But I feel like it's a skill that I've developed over the years. And again, it's one of those things that in corporate America, you just had to develop.
Yeah. Corporate trauma. How would you describe this term, and do you think it actually exists?
Corporate trauma. I definitely think it's a thing, right? Like I definitely do think it exists. And there are many, it can come in many forms, right? Some of them, it's the passive aggressive notes, right? Like we've all seen the memes and the emails where it's like, per my last email, right? Like these are the games in which you have to play sometimes, because that is the culture of some companies, right? Where, you know, it's gotten to the point where people start CCing people, and it's like, this between me and you. Why are you CCing, you know, 5 other people on this, you know? And again, these are the little ways in which it starts to take a toll on you, right? Like you don't even realize it, but, you know, there are ways in which, you know, it does it does invade your personal life as well. So yes, corporate trauma does exist. You know, if there is a toxic culture, where there is one where, you know, people are set up just based on, you know, if I have a title and you don't, and I get treated a certain way. And you know, as, you know, someone who may be, you know, just starting out in their career, well, if this person says it, and even if they're doing something that I'm uncomfortable with, I have to go along with it, because otherwise, they're seen as more valued than I am, right? And again, these are all things that you internalize without even realizing it sometimes. Sometimes you do. And it takes a toll on you. So I do think in toxic environments, corporate trauma is very much a real thing.
Work culture. Are there ways to get a good read in advance of accepting a position?
That is a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think what you can do, you ask questions, and particularly now, as everybody, is trying, Black Lives Matter is a huge thing, being anti-racist is huge, particularly in the startup world, right? It's a little bit easier to be like, what are your values? And these are the things we stand for, in big corporate America, there's a lot of things at the top, maybe it doesn't trickle down at the bottom, but now I think is a time when you can really like ask people, where people are not going to be caught off guard, be like, what are your values? How many, BIPOC people do you have in your organization? Whatever is important to you, I think now is the time that you can start really being vocal and asking those kind of questions. A lot of times before it was like, you don't ask those questions right off, in the beginning of the interview process. You wait closer to the end, or maybe when you get the offer and all these things like that. No, you can kind of be like, oh, well, I noticed, maybe on my interview panel, I haven't talked to any, anybody who looks like me. Where are those people? What are your diversity initiatives? What are, what is your company value? If you're interested in climate change, what are your values? Whatever your values are, I think now is the time more than ever that you can ask, your interviewers, challenge them. What are your what are you doing about that? If they say, well, this is what we believe in, this is what we do. Okay, so what have you done around that? I know some people, they're very big on sustainability. If there is a company out there that is not supporting that, and that's not something you want to do, then you know that. And don't be afraid, to ask at this point, because I don't think it's going to hurt. And again, you might be like, it may sound like a great company, maybe you don't get the job, but always these things work out for a reason. It's never a bad thing. I know for a lot of times things seem really great on the surface, but again, sometimes you talk to the employees and they be like, a get out situation. They're like, don't come here. Don't come here. So, if you can even ask too, like, can I talk to somebody who would be on my team if they're not part of the interview process? Is there someone, who would be a peer that I can talk to? Because I just want to get a sense of what my day-to-day would look like. Again, more times than not, most companies will say yes if there is nothing to highlight. Give me 10, 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be long. I just want to hear their thoughts on, since they joined the company, what do they like about it and things like that. So yeah, now is the time more than ever to kind of really ask those questions so that you can hopefully work for a company that is aligned with what you want to do or what you believe in, and not just, work somewhere where you're just like, why am I doing this?
Right. So yes, there are cues, and yes, this is the time to ask those types of questions.
Absolutely.
What do you think needs to be in place at an organization to encourage employees not to leave, but to stay?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think there needs to be opportunities for growth, right? I think, employees need to feel heard, and not only being heard, but that those things are being taken into consideration and actually being implemented. So whatever that looks like, if I've, been at my role for over a year or two and I'm in the same position and there's no opportunities for growth for me, and you keep telling me it's going to come, but yet it's not, you're not going to follow up with that. So like your words need to be followed by actions, right? So yeah, it's more involved in like making sure your people are growing, making sure they're learning. If there isn't, upskilling them, right? So not only, it doesn't always have to be an upward movement. It could be to the side into another role, but just having opportunities to keep challenging themselves and evolving, right? Because many of the people, when I talk to them, you know, these days when anybody stays at a company for 5 years or longer, it's a feat, you know, that's definitely rare these days. And a lot of times the common answer that I get is that, you know, I've had opportunities to reinvent myself. I've had opportunities to keep growing or move into another department or take on a new task or a new challenge, you know, ultimately, you know, and there are some people who may just want to stay in their same roles, but a lot of times, more than not, people want to kind of constantly keep doing something different, even if their title doesn't change, even if their salary doesn't change. They want something that's going to keep them interested, right? Because our brains are always kind of working in overdrive, and we want to keep learning, I think, in various ways. So keeping people's juices flowing, I think, is definitely a way to retain good talent. And then also having a sense of community with, you know, I don't know how else to put it, but not necessarily good people, but just like people who respect each other, right? Like we don't all have to like each other, but I think if we all have a level of respect and know that my work, your work, regardless of my title or level or, you know, whatever it is I do in a company, if everyone is valued, I think that goes a long way as well.
Awesome. And it's funny because I was at Zenith Media for over 5 years, nearly 6, and that's in large part why I stayed. I kept being challenged with new things, and it never got stale.
Yeah.
I was always learning. I was always growing, taking on new challenges and tasks, and that led to me being there for a very long time.
Yeah.
And having a good experience. Last question.
Of course.
How would you describe your experience of being Black and an HR professional, given the narratives being given light of racism and oppression in the workplace, and HR protecting the employer and not the employee?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you know, as a Black woman, I wear many hats. And then, you know, being, you know, in HR, although sometimes as a recruiter, we're always like, we're not HR, you know, we're separate from, from those things. But yeah, it is definitely one of those things where, you know, you're like, I understand what you're going through. And I know, you know, like if somebody comes and tells me about, you know, they've experienced racism or they've experienced something in the workplace, I'm more likely to believe that, right? Like, because, you know, I'm definitely not gonna be like, really, did that happen? It's probably like, all right, here we go, right? Like, it's definitely not gonna be, you know, but at the same time, I also have to maintain a level of professionalism because, you know, there's always, you know, there has to be an investigation, things have to take place in order for it to happen. And I think for certain companies, you know, HR does get a bad rap that we are protecting the organization. It's more, I think, there can be that, but there's also the level that there has to be due process, right? Because again, in my personal life, as my friends, you know this, if you come and tell me, I'm like, right, what we gonna do about this, right? But from, you know, a corporate perspective, I think everybody deserves a level of like, okay, I hear your grievance, you know, let's work through this and investigate and see what's happening and what can be done. And again, if all those mechanisms are in place, hopefully there will be some kind of action behind what is going on. You know, if it's unfortunately we tend to like give these things levels of like, you know, is it a microaggression? You know, was it outright? You know, but actions will take place. And I think it helps if there is, you know, a solid structure or policy that people can follow where it can say, okay, listen, we've done this, we've investigated, this has been the outcome, you know, now what? You know, so it really depends on what your policy. And again, now more than ever, I'm in the process of writing our DEI policy, and it's a little bit more involved than I thought it would be in terms of like figuring these things out so that employees feel protected. But, you know, in your employee handbook, wherever it might be, look to see what it is that outlines what can be done. And if there isn't there, be like, listen, I don't see anything that would show me what would happen if it's there. So it's, again, yes, there could, you know, a lot of people sometimes don't feel comfortable going to HR. And that's definitely been the practice in the past, where sometimes it does seem as if they're taking the side of the company. And there are a lot of things. Again, I'm not going to speak in very general terms, but, you know, here in the US, it is very much an at-will kind of thing where you can let somebody go like that. In other countries, it's not as simple a procedure to do so if you're working at a global organization. You know, and there are a lot of things, you know, maybe the person who's, you know, who's being part of the complaint is also in a protected class. So it's not as easy to, you know, get rid of that employee, even though you're like, but what is it gonna take, right? So you just gotta consider that there are a lot of things, and it can get complicated. But again, things have changed now. And again, you can probably now more so than ever kind of raise these things and get a little bit more of an effective resolution than you might have not before. And if you don't, then you got to decide if that's the company where you want to work, right? Like, it's not, I know it's always hard because for a lot of us, we always have to choose sometimes, you know, between that paycheck and like our principles, well, not principles, but just like, you know, how bad is it, right? Like, do I not have an income coming in, or can I at least hold out until I find something else? You know, it's not as, it's always as simple as just walking away. Right. And sometimes you have to decide what you can do. Like, I wish it would be like, just walk away, girl, just walk away. But that's not always a decision everybody can make. Everybody's got different circumstances. So yeah, I would say it's with that. But I think, you know, it's definitely helpful, you know, when you are a person of color or Black in HR, you know, we do see things with a different kind of lens. And, you know, where it certainly helps. But I think a lot more HR professionals these days are, you know, most people are in it because they are empathetic and are for the people. So I'll say that.
That's awesome. So I want to end with something that I saw on Fear Not, which is a Iyanla Vanzant show. So I'm going to borrow from her real quick. I'm going to ask you, don't stay silent, because that is the whole premise of this interview, 3 times, and I want for you to fill in the blank. So, don't stay silent about
your feelings.
Don't stay silent about
racism.
Don't stay silent about
that's okay. What would be my last one? Your beliefs. Just stand in them, right? You know, now more than ever, a lot of people are being encouraged to stand up and say what they believe. And, you know, a lot of times it may not seem like you're making a difference, but just do it. You know, it's hard. And I've even learned that I'm an introvert. You know, speaking out is not something I'm comfortable with necessarily. But just do it. Just do it.
That's awesome. I feel that. Thank you. Thank you. It reminds me of a conversation I just had this evening with the fantastic Deborah T. Owens. And she said, honor who you are. Honor you. Let that guide you. Honor who you are. Jerneeka, this was amazing. Thank you.
No, thank you. I hope I did okay.
The fabulous friend you are, being my little guinea pig.
Anytime, I'm always willing to help you know that, right? I will be
you drop some gems. And I think that you're going to impact some people with some of the insightful things that you shared. So thank you.
No, I hope so. I hope anything that anybody can take from this, you know, take what you will, because I've, you know, certainly watched, and a lot of things that are going on right now. It's like, ooh, I can take that, and, you know, whatever. If this does that for somebody, then it was well, worth our conversation being recorded, because we can do this offline anytime. Right? But if this even makes one person, gives them something that they, can take away, then it's all good.
That's right. Well, thank you. And to viewers, I encourage you as well. Don't stay silent. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Bye.